Today we are going to talk about the scale of justice. And when Master Samael talks about the scale of justice, he is referring to fundamentally this image, which I'm sure you've seen before. It's on an Egyptian hieroglyphic. I don't know which temple it's in, but basically it's been recorded in many other um, I don't know, artworks in the ancient Egyptian world, and also obviously nowadays you can go to Egypt and buy one of these, off of a street vendor, no problem. But what it's showing in particular, as you can see in the middle, is the scale of justice. And you can see that in this particular scenario, you have the god Anubis, who is adjusting the scale of justice. And on one side, there is a heart, and on the other side, the feather. And the idea is that when the person goes to the afterlife, their heart is weighed against the feather. And if it's the same weight as the feather or lighter, then they're going to have a great time in the afterlife. But if the heart is heavy and heavier than the feather, then that is going to cause problems and they're going to have a lot of debts which they have to pay. So we're talking about, when we talk about the scale of justice, karma and dharma. You can also see the person who's kind of like nearest Anubis, facing Anubis. I think that's the person who's died, and they're having a look on the scales to see how they're doing with their heart and the feather. And then behind that person to the far left, you've got the couple in the white. Now, some versions say that that's actually the people who are having the heart weighed, not the one I just mentioned. Some say that's the Divine Mother and the Inner Father of that particular person. Then you can see across the top all those different people. Some of them are in pairs, some of them are wearing animal masks, and some of them are single. That is the tribunal of the divine justice. So we're going to talk about all these things and what they mean and how they link to karma and dharma. And we're going to talk about the way in which our spiritual work is impacted by karma and dharma, and how we can adjust our own scale of justice now in the spiritual work that we're doing now in our daily life. So that's what we're going to talk about in this subject. Oh, I've lost my cursor. There we go. Right. So the scale of justice. This is the old. I think that's the one on top of the statue on top of the Old Bailey in London. But she doesn't appear to have a blindfold on, because justice is supposed to be what's the word? Not biased in any way. It's supposed to be indifferent, but the scales and the sword are part of the process. That's the weighing and then the application of the justice. So the weighing of the deeds of the person and the justice. But what we can say is, for us, really, we're looking at I'll move this out of the way again, down there. The law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect is something which impacts all of humanity. And we can go on to say that those people who have chosen to walk on a spiritual path, so one would say all of us basically, they are impacted by a superior law, which is relating to karma and dharma. So there's cause and effect, and then above that, karma and dharma. But what we can do is say, when we say cause and effect, people call it, well, what you give is what you get. Um, or they say, what you sow is what you reap. Um, or they might say, what you put in is what you get out. All these are phrases we hear quite often, but also we hear as a uh, result of the application of cause and effect through those three statements: what you give is what you get, what you sow is what you reap, etc. People then go on to say, ha ha, an eye for an eye. Okay, which I think comes from Shakespeare. But what it means is, if you do that to me, I'll do that back to you. An eye for an eye, or even do it worse. And that is known as, in esoteric circles, Talion's law. And Talion's law is something which is actually quite superficial and a low law. I'm not sure if Talion was a philosopher or ancient Greek or something, but basically Gandhi, and I'll just move us again so we can see Gandhi. Okay. He said, if we go an eye for an eye, all it does is make the whole world blind. So we can start to see that the law, in inverted commas, of cause and effect is something which we, as students of Gnosis, are going to try and um, overcome through our spiritual work. But at the same time, we will be impacted by a more onerous law, which is karma and dharma. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So these manifestations of cause and effect are at a lower level than what we may expect if we are spiritual students, and in particular, Gnostic students. Okay, so cause and effect. I'll move this thing again. Now that I've learned that you can all see that, I'll keep moving it. Okay, so cause and effect is really another way of saying the law of action and consequence. Yeah. So when something uh, happens, there is a result. Okay. And from a spiritual point of view, and we can even say a psychological point of view, we are therefore victims of circumstance because karma and dharma, as we've talked about for the last 2 or 3 weeks, influence the results of the laws of return and recurrence. Remember, we talked about them last week, return and recurrence. And then prior to that, we talked about the ray of death, and we talked about the way in which karma is impacted on the person in the judgment they receive before they are allocated to the next physical body in the 108 lives of that particular person. So karma in itself is a law of compensation. People go, oh, I don't want to get any karma. I don't need karma, man. Oh, karma, karma, Neil from the Young Ones. Oh, heavy karma. Um, it is not a law of vengeance. Karma in itself is a law of compensation. And we'll talk about this in more detail, but you can see from the image, that's going to be a bit of a karma for that chap. Similarly, dharma is something which we can create for ourselves, and therefore the balance, or the scales of justice, the balance between karma and dharma can be managed and Dharma can be um, generated or created by any one of us to help us offset any karma we have from this life or previous lives. So let's talk about a bit more about this. I'm going to move you all again. Okay. So it's a law of compensation, not a law of vengeance. You've already mentioned that. And there is, as you know, no cause without an effect, and there is no effect without a cause. So that image at the top left, where it's got cause and effect in that circle, that's it. It's a sealed unit, you could say. One leads to the other, and the other leads to the other one. So karma and dharma are two laws. Let's just go a bit more deeper into this. But they are based on actions, okay? Based on our actions. So therefore, a good action leads to dharma, and we'll talk about good in a minute, okay? Whereas a bad action leads to karma, okay? Now, karma occurs if we act. It's all about our actions. Karma occurs because of actions. It's not what we think. Okay. However, if we think a negative thought, whatever it is, say we want to, I don't know, we want to slap that politician around the face because we don't think much of their ideas. Okay. We might think that, and in doing that, in that negative thought, we will fortify, strengthen, nourish the corresponding ego. Could be of pride, could be of violence, could be of anger, etc. But if we act, if we actually do throw an egg at a politician or even, slap them or whatever it is, if we act, we generate karma and we fortify the corresponding egos that were involved in that action. Okay. So we can say we pay in inverted commas, and we're talking about what that payment is or how it's given to us or how we pay it in a moment. We pay karma for the negative we have done, but also we pay karma for the positive that we don't do. So you can start to see that it's a little bit more complicated than it is portrayed in the general public, or the way other schools' teachings talk about this. Karma in itself is something given to us uh, based on what we have done, which is negative, or what we don't do, which would have been positive. Karma in itself is applied to show us our defects or our egos through a suffering. Okay. So, for example, it could be that we have an ego which is very angry all the time towards a particular, um, I don't know, a dentist we have to go and visit. And that means that the karma associated with the manifestation of that anger, i.e., the defect or the ego, when that anger is manifesting, we are generating karma. And so, therefore, the associated suffering, as in the karma we've just generated, could be given to us in the next hour, in the next week, in the next year, in the next life, whatever. Okay. So we don't know when exactly the karma will be allocated to us for allowing any particular defect or ego to manifest negatively or in any way. But what we do know is that that karma will be there to teach us and show us what egos generated it. So, in other words, if we slap someone about in this life, in the next life, we will be in the same argument, the same discussion, the same anger, the same motor center being utilized by the ego. But this, in that time, we will be slapped about rather than the other person. So the karma will manifest to help us understand the reason we are in, as you all know from previous talks, our particular level of being, our particular scenario, our particular daily life is like it is because of the egos which we continue to hold within our psychology because we're doing no work on them per se. So, uh, karma gives us the possibility to see our egos, and in this way, Master Samael describes karma as a useful medicine. Okay, so what we need to do with karma is rather than say, "Oh, I'm so hard done by. Why is it always me who's got no money? Why is it always me who misses the bus? And why is it always me? Why?" Okay. Instead, we need to accept the karma and then try, as students of Gnosis, to understand the corresponding ego which generated that karma so that we can eliminate it with the help of the Divine Mother, so that we can remove the karma from this and future moments in our daily life. So, the consequences of our actions are a result of the egos that generate the actions or mistakes that we make. And we are therefore victims of our own mistakes. The egos are the only thing responsible for generating our problems. They generate or induce, you could say, a payment of karma, which we pay back with emotional or physical or intellectual pain and or suffering. As you can see, in the internal worlds, and we can say here and now, in the internal worlds, each one of us has our own account book. They keep an account of our karma and our dharma. They, as you can see in that example, there's a lot more karma than dharma for most people. Okay, that's because we have a lot of egos that manifest and operate all the time. Therefore, we get a lot of karma to go with that, a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. In the internal worlds, this tribunal of divine justice, which I mentioned earlier, exists in the fifth dimension, in the astral dimension. And in that place, Venerable Master Anubis, so the one we saw earlier, the Jekyll-headed dog, God, okay, and his 42 judges. So remember the judges in that image, they were across the top of the image we looked at. They allocate karma and or dharma to any particular person, and it could be as they go through their life or at the end of their life, etc. That means we have this account book where everything is listed and kept. It's like you could say the karma is the debt and the dharma is the credit in our own account book. So we have this book, Karma and Dharma, and ultimately, as we saw in that picture earlier, the ancient Egyptian picture, our accounts need to be balanced. The scales of justice that we refer to in this topic are generally very heavily leaning down to the side of karma. However, the good news is that as students of Gnosis, we can start to rebalance those scales, our own particular scales, to get them horizontal so that our life will improve. We'll have less karma, and what it will be in balance with the Dharma, which we will be accruing. Excuse me. Okay, so we can pay karma to help rebalance the scales in a number of ways. The first way, the obvious way, I suppose you could say, is that we pay karma with the suffering and the pain. So we accept the karma that we're given. We accept our point or place in our life. We accept the fact that we are always in a position when we can't get exactly what we want, but we're working through those moments, understanding that the suffering or pain we have is paying off this scale, so the karma is getting lighter, making the balance become more horizontal. Alternatively, as you can see, we could increase the Dharma. If we increase the Dharma, then the balance or the scales will balance. So adding more Dharma, as you can see to the left-hand side of the scales, will redress the balance. If we do good deeds via or through the right thoughts, feelings, and actions, excuse me, okay, then the Dharma will begin to increase. In other words, excuse me, if we are in the moment, then the essence is able to manifest, and our thoughts and feelings and actions will be in accordance with consciousness, active consciousness. And then by acting differently in our daily life, for example, excuse me, modifying our conduct, managing our energies, being charitable, gentle, helpful in society, having more humility, patience, serenity, forgiveness, etc., we can cancel out the effect of karma with the Dharma that we would earn. Excuse me. Gotta have a drink. So, for example, if we help the sick or the ill or the infirm or the old, then there's a chance that we will be healed and cured ourselves. So if we are patient with other people, for example, by having more humility, then we will reduce our suffering, as the ego will not be so effective at generating karma in its manifestation. So if we stop hurting other people, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, not just physically, then our life will start to change. Okay. If we look at this scale of justice and the current situation for all of us, which is that they're tipped towards the karma, we have this karma and dharma in the book, our own account book. I'm just going to move us up again. This is I wonder if it goes over there. There we go. Okay. So we have an action, the cause. We've already said that the cause generates an effect. So if we're in the moment, the essence is the cause. The essence will act. The consciousness will be active in those moments. But if we are identified with any particular ego, then that will generate the action or the cause in that moment, which will then give us an effect. And that effect will have a corresponding impact of receiving dharma if the effect is positive, or karma if the effect is negative. And we can say, I have to move us again. Okay. If we continue, karma, as we've already been saying, generates suffering for each one of us. But dharma, in other words, on this particular image, on the left-hand side of the scale, if we do something positive, we will generate dharma. And as you can see, it comes in two different ways. If we are very generous with somebody in the material sense, so if we give them a lift, or we give them our car park ticket didn't run out, so we give them our car park ticket, and then they use the rest of the hours on our car. Or if we literally do give money, or we're charitable, then the materialistic aspects of the dharma which we gain will be because of that act, which is materialistic. However, if we do something which generates an effect which is gives us dharma, but is something more spiritual, for example, if we are a student of Gnosis and we um, share some time with anybody who wants that, in terms of being compassionate or being empathetic or being helpful to another person from a spiritual point of view, giving them what we've learnt through our own gnosis, then we will gain spiritual dharma. Okay? Now, everything we talked about up to this point has been on the effect side, the right-hand side of this process. But we can also balance the scales with another aspect on the left-hand side of this process. In other words, we can begin to apply the psychological death with the help of our Divine Mother to remove the ego, so that when the ego is not there, there is no player, or there's no aspect of our psychology which is going to manifest as an action. We have removed that part of the equation, if you want to call it an equation, and thereby we will modify the effect. And we can say, just move this again, sorry. In this tribunal of the divine justice, there is two laws that operate, which are superior laws. Obviously, as you can just see, the left-hand side, we have justice, strict law. So the law is the law, okay? But there is also mercy, which emanates from love. And in the tribunal of the divine justice, when the tribunal see that we have consciously removed any particular ego, and there is no ego which can act, the karma which has been generated previously, I've lost my cursor, there we go. Okay, if you look down at the bottom right, the karma here on the bottom right, generated from an ego, is now removed out of mercy. So mercy, a superior law, washes over the inferior law of cause and effect, karma and dharma. Okay, so the scale of justice, as you can see, is more complex than just a straightforward trying to balance up the scales. What we're talking here is real beings in the internal worlds who actually apply the law of justice against the mercy in front of any particular work that we do as students of Gnosis to help remove or to take that karma away. So we are modifying the effect because we have altered the cause. Using the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, we can get Dharma and eliminate egos to reduce the karma. So you can see that the balancing of those scales begins to get more industrious, it's more intense. Thus, we need, as students of Gnosis, to stop creating karma and instead create Dharma. Okay? And that Dharma is generated, as we've already been saying, through the right thoughts, feelings, and actions being consciously applied in our daily life, generating within us, as students of Gnosis, merits of the heart. If we start to look at where we suffer the most in our daily life, when we then take that and apply the psychological work to that place in which we suffer the most in our life, soon we generate merits of the heart and we're able to, for example, help other people change our habits. You know, if we're always in I don't know, I'm trying to think of some examples. We've got bad habits and we find ourselves in dodgy clubs or pubs, or maybe we're being very sarcastic all the time, or maybe, you know, we're very, very opinionated all the time about things which we don't really need to be opinionated on. Then if we consciously stop doing those things, those actions, then the ego cannot manifest. It doesn't eliminate the karma which is generated from that ego or has been generated from that ego. But what it does do is it stops more karma being due. And then if we apply the psychological death, then the karma will be removed out of mercy. in the tribunal of the divine justice. Now, what we talked about last week was that we know that the egos repeat in every return through every recurrence, and in that return and the associated recurrence, there is always going to be karma applied accordingly based on what we did last time in our last life. So if there's somebody as an example, in a last life they were a murderer, and it started from a gunfight in America, somewhere, I don't know, in the Wild West, then they would repeat the same event, the same argument, the same character, and the anger that made them kill before will, in this life, get them killed. So the karma is applied to learn. And some of that learning would be, if you remember the ray of death, it would be in one of those retrospections. Remember, we talked about the 3 retrospections just before we die, and then the 2 once we have died. So in that process, the consciousness, the essence, is going to get an education about that particular example. If we help someone in this life, in the next life, we will be helped. So the divine justice itself is love, mercy, and justice, strict law. And if we eliminate the cause of the karma, the ego, then the karma will be eliminated out of mercy. But remember that karma may still be there based on what happened in previous lives. So we have to be aware that we might go through this process, but still have a bit of karma to pay off. You can also get Dharma as a result of the suffering that we put ourselves through in the elimination of any particular ego. So if we say to our Divine Mother, look, I've got this ego of gluttony, and I really, really like chocolate biscuits. They're bad for me, but I still eat chocolate biscuits. And I don't even realize it, but suddenly I've gone through a whole packet of chocolate biscuits. We say, I'm going to deny the ego the pleasure of manifesting, in this case, gluttony. Okay. So if we go through a suffering of not eating chocolate biscuits just so we can expose that ego as it tries to manifest, and then we ask our inner mother to eliminate it in that moment with the death in motion practice you will know about, okay, then we will be gaining Dharma because of the work we have done, you could say the suffering we have incurred in eliminating that particular ego with the help of our Divine Mother. We can also negotiate our karma. We can pay off karma with Dharma. And we do that by consciously going to the tribunal of the divine justice. And we can go there with our Divine Mother and we ask her to negotiate. And she negotiates our karma by saying or using the Dharma that we have as a collateral. And again, a superior law washes away inferior laws. So with mercy, karma is negotiated. So you may well see this in certain places. It says, the Divine Mother says, combat the lion of the law, which is the karma, with the scales of justice. In other words, if we are able to go to negotiate to try and level those 2 pans in the scale of justice by offsetting one with Dharma, so the karma is rebalanced, then we can do that with the help of our Divine Mother in the internal worlds at the tribunal. If we realize where we are in our life based on our level of being and the daily occurrences that we find ourselves in, we see where we are from the point of view of the karma we are incurring in our daily life. And rather than hide or suffer or resent that situation we're in, what Master Samael says, we need to accept the situation we're in and not be a victim of the circumstances we are in. Use the circumstances we are in positively so that we can begin to balance the three factors, balance the scales of justice. So here again is that image. This is another version of the same image. Again, you can see the tribunal of the divine justice across the top. And you can see Anubis on the scales, but also Anubis bringing the person in on the left-hand side at the bottom. He's bringing that person in to do the weighing of the heart against the feather. And if you're really interested, you can find out all the names of these characters, even the name. There's a feather there, and that feather has its own name. You can find all that out online in various places, explaining this particular image in great detail. But we know that all of us need to look at the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, because with those three factors, we are able to pay off karma, generate dharma, that's with the death and the sacrifice, and we can pay off our account to balance those scales. In this topic, often there is questions we can reflect on. So, for example, if there was somebody in our local town or village or city who was, I don't know, a nasty piece of work, who'd been manipulating youngsters outside the school gates or something, and he was being chased by a load of people, would we hide that person so they didn't get a load of vigilantes trying to beat him up? If we did that, would we get karma or dharma? Similarly, if we gave away all of our money, say, for example, we just got paid at the end of the month and we give all our money to charity, but then we can't afford to feed ourselves or the family, will we get karma or dharma? And with those two sort of reflections, we can soon come to the conclusion that we, as students of Gnosis, are not in a position to judge. We're not in a position to judge others because we don't know the other's level of being. We don't know what karma or dharma they've been given. We don't know, and we're not superior because we're Gnostic students. Oh, look at them, aren't they bad? Look at what they're doing. We have to come to the conclusion that the whole process of karma and dharma, as described in the last few minutes, is something way beyond what we can even imagine with our mind. It's something which is very conscious and a set of very superior laws, as you've just said: mercy, justice, the tribunal of the divine justice. So all we can do in any moment as students of Gnosis is to be connected and in the moment, so that when we're in this connection, the state of connection with our inner being, we will know what we need to do in that moment. Sometimes you walk down the street and there's someone asking for money. Do we give them the money? Or are we going to spend all day wishing we hadn't, because they might go and spend it on drugs or alcohol? Or do we give them the money because it feels right? Or do we give them the money because it looks good? So when other people see me giving money, it makes me feel warm and glowing. These things need attention in our daily life because there is an associated karma and dharma to everything we do, every action we do. And therefore, to be in the moment, to be aligned with our inner being is where we need to be in terms of living our life as students of Gnosis. Okay, so now I'm just going to run through a few different karmas which you may read about or hear about or think about in the next few weeks. It could be that a person is suffering in their work because they have a very bossy boss, a very intense micromanager type boss. And they also may then go home and find that they've got uh, if they're quite young, they might have bossy parents. Okay. So in this situation, the person is living a life being the underdog, being the one who's bossed about all the time, and that might generate resentments and things like that to do with pride, to do with humility. And that's where the associated karma needs to be analyzed in that particular example. But karma may also be allocated to a country, okay, where in that particular country, there's always situations with natural disasters, or there's always situations with lack of food, or there's always situations with war, for example. It could be that a community, any particular community, is impacted by karma through natural events, for example, floods or tornadoes or natural disasters or earthquakes, whatever it is. It could be that another type of karma might be very family related, where diseases are spread down through the family from generation to generation because of karma. But as we've already said, karma can be addressed, karma can be balanced. But there is an exception. There is a karma called karma duro, karma D-U-R-O, karma duro, which is karma which cannot be paid off. It is something allocated to that particular person in that particular life, which they have to live through in terms of karma. And that karma could be something like a chronic illness or something like that. So that's general examples of some sorts of karma and their causes. Now I would ask you to be completely ubicated, to be completely in this moment, because I need to tell you two other things which often give a reaction. So I'd ask you to reflect. Um, Karma in itself can be shared. Okay. So it's shared in two different ways, two fundamental different ways. The first way karma is spread or shared is through sexual intercourse. And another way that karma is shared is through transplants or giving blood. Now, obviously, we're not trying to be fanatical here. We're not asking anybody to do anything life-threatening or out of order. What we're talking about is somebody applying consciousness in any moment. If it's between a family, if blood is given between a family, for example, then that family have already got a very similar karma. So it's not such a big karmic change for that person. And also we need to balance the fact that is it better to be alive than have a bit more karma? But what we do know is that karma is, excuse me, blood is mixed with many other people's blood to get specific bits of the blood. You know, they split it all down and then reconstitute it, etc., which is all fine, completely correct. But the karma is spread in that way through those methods. So we're not saying don't, we're not saying you must. What we're saying is this is just a straightforward um, statement saying that karma can be spread in this way. But obviously, it's always down to the person, what they feel in that moment, what they feel is correct, is what they have to do, is what they have to do. Excuse me. Finally, to tell you that yes, we've talked about karma and dharma and the law of recurrence and the law of return and all these different things. Over the weeks, we've talked about many different natural laws, and it seems as though there's, the ray of death and everything, but it seems as though there is a process. But we must remember that on top of all that, there is also the law of accidents. So the law of accidents is something for each of us to reflect upon because it's something which we can't necessarily comprehend or get to grips with through the mind. We need to get this through meditation, okay? Because how can a law be an accident, if you see what I mean? Very confusing for the mind. So we can reflect on that in meditation. But in the end, we are asking for every person to apply these teachings of Gnosis, and in particular related to the karma, not fanatically, not dogmatically. It's up to the person. Okay. People may give blood for other reasons. People may give blood mechanically, just give it because they give it. But there's a if each of us, excuse me, if each of us decides that we're going to give blood, that's fine. But it's a matter of thinking about, if I give blood, is it going to help somebody else, and is that going to uh, impact me by giving me additional dharma by helping that other person, even though the associated karma may bring that down a bit on those scales, that scale of justice. All right. So that was the entire talk. I'm going to stop recording, stop sharing. Here we go.